Hello and welcome back to the Get More Ministries YouTube channel. My name is Daryl and we are continuing our video series through the Bible. We are reading the Bible in the calendar year of 2024. We're reading it from Genesis to Revelation. And my goal was initially to provide weekly videos kind of recapping what we've been reading and some of my thoughts and insights into the text. However, unfortunately, kind of just the demands of life with working a full-time job and then also going to seminary, I just wasn't really able to have the bandwidth to work in a video series. So we're going to adapt my original plan, and it's going to be more of me doing an overview of maybe of one book or grouping a few books together and kind of just tracing that narrative that runs from Genesis all the way through Revelation and providing a few insights along the way. So there won't be 52 videos to this series anymore, but it's still going to cover the breadth of Scripture, and we're going to talk about some fun things along the way. So in the last video that I did, we were in Genesis. So now I want to tap into Exodus and just talk a little bit about kind of the three things that I see as the main hinge pieces of Exodus that really propel the story forward. So Exodus has 40 chapters. It's not a short book, but it's actually fairly zoomed in on one period of time, whereas Genesis starts all the way back, with the creation of the world and moves forward through quite a while of human history, all the way up to Abraham and his descendants, and we leave with the 12 sons of Jacob in the land of Egypt with their descendants, and then that family continues to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and then there's a time gap between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, and so that is where we pick up. There's a 400-year time gap between the end of Genesis and Exodus, and so that's where we pick up. But kind of the three main things that kind of make Exodus distinct and unique are God's revelation to Moses at the burning bush, then the actual Exodus event of the Hebrews leaving Egypt, and then the third one is the newly formed nation of Israel at the base of Mount Sinai in chapter 19, where they prepare to meet God. So those are the three big things that I want to talk about a little bit. So Exodus chapter 3 and 4, let me get my screen up. Yep. So Exodus 3 and 4 is where we encounter this revelation of God to Moses. So that begins in 3, runs through 4. And it starts off, it just says, meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock, his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire but was not consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't the bush burning up? So God catches Moses' attention with a burning bush. Moses is intrigued. He goes over and approaches the bush. Then God starts speaking with him, and he says, Moses, Moses, and Moses has the response of, here I am. Abraham has that same response. God says, don't come any closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And they continue to have an exchange, and God tells them, hey, go back to the land of Egypt, and I'm going to use you as kind of my agent to bring the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt and into the land that I promised their father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm going to use you to accomplish this mighty act. And Moses is, hesitant, but kind of the pivotal piece of this revelation that Moses receives here at the bush is in verses 13 through 15. And so Moses asks God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? And then God responds in verse 14, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, "Say this to the Israelites: Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation." So God reveals his name to Moses, something he's never done to any of the other characters that we've seen so far in the biblical narrative. And so this is a really big event, and it distinguishes Yahweh as the God of Abraham and his descendants, the God of the people of Israel. And there's this kind of intimate connection there. And so he's really setting himself up as their God, communicating that to them so that they can understand it, and move forward in a relationship with him. So that's kind of the first thing that's really big with Exodus. The second thing is the actual Exodus event, where the Hebrew people, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Israelites, all, I use those terms synonymously, but where they actually depart from Egypt. And that happens in chapter 12. So kind of from chapters 5 through 11, and really the first half of 12, we see Moses, approaching Pharaoh, God doing the mighty acts, and all of these miracles that God's doing in these 10 plagues reveal who he is, distinguish him between all the other gods of the ancient Near East and of Egypt specifically. And Yahweh is establishing himself as sovereign over everything, including Egypt's pantheon of gods, right? And so you get to the 10th plague, which is striking down of the firstborn, and now all of a sudden the Egyptians are totally devastated. The people's morale is devastated. The nation itself is devastated. Its resources are devastated. And they are ready for the Israelites to leave. So we pick up in chapter 12, verse 33. It says, "Now the Egyptians pressured the people," meaning the Israelites, "in order to send them quickly out of the country, for they said, 'We're all going to die.' So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in clothes over their shoulders." So here they're actually departing out of the land of Egypt. And this is significant because if we remember what God had told Abraham, we go back up to Genesis 15. Too far. Up to Genesis 15, where God makes a covenant with Abraham. Let me find my spot here. So God makes the covenant. Okay, up here, Genesis 15:13. Backtrack, actually. I'll backtrack. Chapter 15, verse 2. Abram says, "Lord God, what can you give me, since I am childless and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" Abraham continued to look, "You have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir." And then God responds, "This one will not be your heir. Instead, the one who comes from your own body will be your heir." And so Isaac isn't born yet at this time. So God is telling him, no, you are going to have an heir with your wife Sarai, and that one is going to be the one through whom I trace your lineage. So then we jump down to verse 13, and God says to Abram, "Know this for certain, your offspring will be foreigners in a land that does not belong to them. They will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. However, I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will go out with many possessions. But you will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. In the 4th generation they will return here," meaning the land that Abram is currently in the promised land. "They will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." So the reason why the Exodus event is significant is because it's God revealing that he's faithful to this promise he made to Abram way back in Genesis 15. So as this narrative continues forward, we see God making a promise and then remaining faithful to that promise. And so we see that connection between Genesis 15, where God tells Abram his descendants are going to be oppressed in a land for 400 years, and then leave. And then we see in Exodus 12 where Abram's descendants are oppressed in a land for 400 years, and he brings them out with a mighty hand. So that's the second significant event where the Israelites actually leave the land of Egypt. And then the third significant event is the covenant at Mount Sinai. And so in chapter 19, we see Israel preparing to meet the Lord. And then in chapter 20, that's actually where God gives the 10 Commandments. And from 20 through chapter 40, the second half of the book, we actually see God giving instructions. He's giving the law to Moses on how Israel is supposed to be in covenant with God. So it kind of dictates their covenant obligations for this relationship of being the Lord's people. But chapter 19 is really significant because it's where the people of Israel are prepared to meet God for the first time. And so we see here in the first half of chapter 19 where God's giving instructions of, you guys need to basically don't let anyone come up this mountain, meaning Mount Sinai, where the Lord is going to come down. Don't let anyone come up here. Don't let anybody touch the mountain. You need to be consecrated. You need to be prepared. This is a significant thing. Like, I'm not just going to pop in and out. Like, this is a very significant event that the Israelites need to prepare for and have to approach with a very intentional seriousness. And so now we jump down to chapter 19, verse 16. So the Israelites have been making their preparations for this serious event. And it says here in verse 16, on the third day, when morning came, there was thunder and lightning, a thick cloud on the mountain, and a loud trumpet sound, so that all the people in the camp shuddered. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was completely enveloped in smoke because the Lord came down on it in fire. Its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in the thunder. So this is an incredibly significant event for the people of Israel. They've been told that they're descendants of this man named Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob. And everyone there in Egypt, all of these descendants stem from the 12 sons of Jacob and ultimately Abraham. And they've been told that the God of Abraham made a promise to him about having this land, but like, they're enslaved in Egypt, right? So we have God coming down and personally interacting with one of these descendants, namely Moses. That's in chapters 3 and 4. And through this Moses, God moves and does all these miraculous things and sets this group of people free. And they actually leave this nation. And now they are standing before him at the foot of this mountain. And they're set to meet him for the first time. They haven't met him before. This is incredibly significant, and it sets up the rest of the Old Testament narrative. So now that the people of Israel have met their God, have met Yahweh, and he's about to reveal to them how they're supposed to be his people, and he's chosen them, and that means that they have certain covenant obligations in order to be his people in the way that he deems is appropriate, and how they're supposed to not only be faithful to him, but faithfully represent and present him to the nations surrounding them. All of that flows out of chapter 19, and all of that revelation of how God is preparing them to be his people, then sets up the rest of the Old Testament narrative. And we see from the books of Joshua through especially Second Chronicles, that chunk of the Old Testament narrative, we see how faithful is Israel in doing what they're supposed to do based on Exodus 19 and following through the end of Exodus and into Leviticus and part of Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all the books where the law is presented. How is Israel doing? How faithful were they in that? So yeah, these are the three hinge parts of Exodus. You have God meeting Moses in the burning bush, revealing himself. God using Moses to deliver his people out of Egypt, and then actually meeting those people at Mount Sinai and preparing them to be his nation of priests and proclaimers of who he is to all the nations around them. So it's a very exciting book. Exodus is great. It's got a fast-paced narrative, and then it's easy to kind of feel like you're getting bogged down in chapters 20 through 40. But I encourage you to look at the big picture here and how this sets up the rest of the narrative. And I think when we can see that a bit better, it makes all of this material very exciting. And then it also makes the book of Leviticus exciting because that continues this foundational setup for who this nation is supposed to be. So yeah, that's what I got for you guys in Exodus. And, I'd encourage you, maybe if you've never read through the Bible, pick it up and start in Genesis and work through. There's going to be a lot that you feel like you don't understand, and that's okay, because it's about incremental growth. So you're not going to understand everything in the Bible perfectly the first time you read it, or the second time you read it, or the 20th time you read it. Each time you read it, you're going to get a little bit more, and it's incremental growth. And so if you don't read a ton in general, and if you've never read ancient literature, it's reasonable to expect that maybe reading the Bible is going to feel a little bit clunky at times. Like, it's going to feel awkward. Awkward is the word I'm looking for. And that's because it kind of takes time to get used to reading ancient literature, right? This is a translation of ancient literature. And so don't be discouraged by that if you feel like, man, I really struggle in this. Don't be discouraged by that. It's okay. You start where you start, and you just keep showing up faithfully every day and trying to be faithful in that, and say to God, hey, I want to know you better, and I believe that faithfully and consistently engaging in the Bible is the foundational way in which I do that. So I'm going to keep showing up. That's the best way and the best place to start. So I'd encourage you to take that step if you've never done so before. That's all I got in this video. So until next time, happy Bibling.